Kramer, and I am the Vice President of the Wabash Planning Commission. However, our President, John Burnsworth, is unable to attend tonight, so I'll be chairing the meeting. And first thing I'd like to ask is just remind everyone, please turn off your cell phones, just silence them so we don't get interrupted this evening. And then, Ms. Karen, would you please do a roll call?
Sure.
Thank you.
Bill Burrows.
Here.
Peter's absent. Barry Kramer.
Here.
John's absent. Justin Adams.
Here.
Jason Celeste.
Here.
Thad Maple.
Here.
Adam Skakeman.
Here.
Heather Allen Hoover.
Here.
Okay.
And Karen, how many are in attendance?
We have 7 of the 9.
Thank you very much. The next item of business is new business and for the board. So we are all city members or within the city boundary, except 2 of us, and we're called the jurisdictional members. I don't live within the city limits, but I live within the zoning boundary. Scott Reiner, and Scott is not here tonight. He's also in that same situation. He does not live in the city limits, but he lives in the zoning boundary, the jurisdictional boundary. One of us needs to be selected as to be a member on the Board of Zoning Appeal to represent the jurisdictional area. We did a little talking beforehand, and Scott is not able to be here tonight, and he is a brand new member to the commission. And so I'm going to make the recommendation. Do I do that?
Fine.
And yes, I'm nominating myself. I'm sorry, but well, thank you for that, Bill. I appreciate that. Because Scott is just, I have a few more years under my belt, and because Scott is getting, going to be experienced, in a year, I will step aside and ask for him to step in there. But could I please have a motion
So moved.
and a second?
I'll.
Thank you. All those pro?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Thank you, I think, very much. The first meeting is next week, and that's why we had to act on that this evening, everybody. Okay, the next meeting is Agenda B on our agenda. And because of tonight is kind of an emotional topic, we've been talking about this in Wabash County for a number of years now. So I've been asked to go ahead and read a prepared statement. It's also going to give you an idea of kind of how this evening is going to go. So everybody gets a chance to hear, to be educated, but to also express your feelings as well. And is Connie here? Is Connie in the, hi Connie, it's nice to meet you. I apologize, I didn't introduce myself. So tonight we have invited Connie Neiniger from CN Consulting in Monticello to provide the Plan Commission with information concerning industrial solar fields, and that may be from a positive or a pro-solar field perspective. I want to emphasize that there will be no action on the issue of industrial solar fields taken here tonight. It is strictly educational. So we want to give Connie enough time to make her presentation. So we ask that during her presentation, we will not be taking any comments. No comments or questions to interrupt her. And that's also from us, folks. We're not going to be asking any questions during the presentation. From anyone who is interested, sometime later tonight, there will be a chance to ask questions and there'll be a chance to rebut anything mentioned by the presenter. There will also be other opportunities to express your opinions at future meetings. And you will always be notified what is on the agenda and what will be discussed at any future meetings. We ask that everyone here this evening, please listen attentively to what's being said and to be respectful and courteous of those who are speaking. And anyone who is present and who has signed in will then at the appropriate time be given a chance to ask any question. So again, I'm going to emphasize, if you just come in and you think you might want to talk, ask a question, please just come on up and sign in, please. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to gain information from the proponent's perspective. It is a public meeting where everyone is able to hear the information being given. Before any action can be taken by this planning commission or on this or any other information provided, whether it's in favor or opposed, the planning commission will hold a public hearing where everyone who wants to speak gets an opportunity to do so. And again, that will be months down the road. So this is how the procedure for this evening is going to go. Connie is going to be speaking about the advantages and the usefulness from her perspective of industrial solar fields. And then when she's finished with her formal presentation, the members of the Planning Commission, we get first dibs. We will have an opportunity to ask any questions that we have wished to hear after her information. Then after the Planning Commission, we get to ask our questions. Then we will allow anyone from the audience to ask a question. And again, you have to be signed in. After you folks have asked your questions, then we, as the Planning Commission, get to follow that up with anything that maybe we thought of or maybe your questions inspired. And after all the questions have been asked, we'll then have a short time for anyone who is an opponent of anything that Ms. Niger has said. You'll get a chance for rebuttal. It will be a timed rebuttal just because we all want to get home before midnight tonight. But you'll have a chance for closing remarks. Are there any questions about how this evening's plan is going to go? Okay, thank you. At this time, I'd like to welcome Connie Nininger from the CN Consulting. Excuse me. Oh, and I am sorry, forgive me. Before we welcome Ms. Connie, go have a seat. Mr. Lehman, our attorney, has a comment or has comments he'd like to make as well.
Yeah, the mayor wanted to be here this evening, but the mayor has a function in Indianapolis. And so he has presented a couple comments he wanted to make at the outset of the discussion also. So I am reading this from what the mayor has provided. Good evening. Unfortunately, I am unable to attend the Wabash City Plan Commission due to a previously scheduled AIM, which is Accelerate Indiana Municipalities, which is a resource organization for municipal government. I'm at a scheduled AIM board meeting and legislative dinner in Indianapolis. I want to take this opportunity to let everyone know that the city will listen to both sides of any discussion when items are presented to any of our boards or commissions. That is exactly what the presentation tonight is, listening to the side of solar advocates. We have repeatedly heard from the residents opposed to solar at many of our meetings in the past. As mayor, I am elected to represent all citizens of this community, and I take that responsibility seriously. I am concerned about, quote, fake news, close quote, on a national level and a local level. It is my opinion that opponents of solar are going out of their way to spread local fake news that supports their narrative. Case in point is the notification of residents around recently purchased land for an industrial park expansion north of County Road 100 South and east of State Road 115. Telephone calls were made to residents stating that the city was going to put industrial solar farms on land that was purchased. Nothing could be further from the truth. And again, I believe this is fake news, was disseminated to obtain a large crowd at this meeting to intimidate the Plan Commission and the presenter. I believe there is a place for alternative electric generation. I believe that the city should do everything within its power to reduce costs that we are paying for power for our facilities. I would ask that lies and innuendo be removed from the discussion to better educate our citizens and allow all sides to be heard.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that. Okay. So now, and thank you again, Connie. At this time, we'd like to hear from Connie M. Nininger with CN Consulting LLC from Monticello. And Connie, do you mind just go ahead and introducing yourself and giving us some of your background? Is it on?
Oh, push the green light.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Okay, I'll try to talk loud enough so everyone can hear. Again, Connie Nininger. I currently live in Monticello in White County, Indiana. Bill can verify this for me. Okay, okay. I graduated from Wabash High School, so. So my father worked for NIPSCO and so we lived here for several years. So I'm very familiar with the town and the county. So I just retired, 5 years ago, I retired from the Indiana State Department of Agriculture, where I was in charge of economic development for the Department of Ag and International Trade. Prior to that, I spent time in White County as the Economic Development Director during the development of their renewable energy projects. I helped write the zoning ordinance. I was the liaison between the county, the developers, and the landowners. And so I helped negotiate the agreements that are in place there in White County. We currently have 7 wind farms and 4 solar projects. Actually, a 5th was just approved too. 2 are already operating, 3 are not quite starting construction yet. 1 started and the other 2 are still, will probably be about a year away. So I'm familiar with renewable energy. I'm here to talk about my experiences, what we have found. The information I share is fact-based, and you will notice on the handouts that I do source all of the information. I also work with Purdue University. They received a federal grant titled RSTEP, Renewable Energy Siting and Technical Engagement Program. And so I am one of the advisors on that program with Purdue University, again, to share information with our communities here in Indiana about renewable energy. So you can make informed decisions. I'm not here to say you need to do that project, you need to do this project, it needs to be this way. I give you a range of reasonable, again, what I have seen happen in other communities. I have also been the National Policy Advisor for the Center for Infrastructure and Economic Development. Again, an organization that focuses on renewable energy and helping communities understand the facts of renewables and the documents and agreements that can help them. So as we start today, I'm often asked why. Why here and why now? And so those are some of the things I want to talk to you about as we go through this. So what are some of the key drivers that we see in renewable energy? Okay, so we're trying to coordinate this here. Okay, so first of all, our energy is changing, and our energy demand versus our supply is actually narrowing to the point that our demand is going to exceed our supply here in Indiana sooner than later. And it's already starting. Also, cost competitiveness. As with any project business, they have to look at the cost. And so the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission reviews the cost of all types of energy, and I'll share some of that information with you. Another key point for citing renewables or any type of project is access to the electrical grid. So I'll show you some of that. And then federal and state policies. First of all, Indiana does not have a mandatory renewable energy portfolio, which means we do not mandate that a certain percentage of our power must come from renewables. Some states around us, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, they do have mandatory requirements that by a certain year, a certain percentage of their power must come from renewables. We call ours voluntary at this point. And then also, we are looking at the option of decreasing our dependence on foreign oils, which as everybody hears in the, in the news, that is a challenge when wars break out overseas. And then we have major corporations requiring renewable energy, and that's very important for economic development. So this is a chart of the U.S. rising energy demand. So if you look at the green, that is basically renewable energy consumption. You can see it's been going up. The blue is the total energy consumption, and the red line is the per capita energy consumption. Now, if you look, the energy consumption, the blue, is now starting to exceed the actual capacity. And this is across the country, not just here in Indiana. And I do have a chart on what's happening in Indiana too, to show you that. This is Indiana's supply gap. So as you can see, about 2023, 24, all of a sudden, our demand is starting to exceed our supply or our resources. And they show that that gap is going to widen as time goes on. This was actually in the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission report, IURC. They study this and they have a 30-year plan watching what's happening with energy. And so as we talk about energy, often people will say, well, it costs so much to put wind and solar. Again, this chart shows you that the fact is wind and solar are now the least expensive form of energy production. This chart shows the levelized cost of energy, which takes into consideration building a facility, maintaining the facility, actually providing the fuel source. So in other words, coal, every coal-fired generating plant has to buy the coal. So they have ongoing expenses. They don't have to buy the wind and solar in the same manner. They do provide leases on the land, so they have access to that wind and solar. And so you could almost consider the lease the same as buying the utility or the source, but it's not near the amount that coal and gas cost. So what this shows is nuclear is right up there at the top as far as the most expensive form of energy production. A lot of people say, oh, we need to go to nuclear, because yes, they have developed this SMRs, which are the small nuclear reactors. Those are not ready to go to market yet, and they have not been permitted by the Nuclear Energy Association. They're looking at probably about 15 to 20 years before those will be fully marketable and reliable for use in homes. So what you see, the bottom two, solar and wind, are the least expensive form of energy production. And that levelized cost also takes into consideration if they have to decommission the plant and upgrades and maintenance on it. So that's what's driving a lot of where we're at today. I mentioned the utility grid. Those are the high power lines. A lot of people will say, hey, if we're producing power right here in our backyard, why can't we use it? Well, first of all, the volume of power that they are producing at these facilities, such as the solar facilities, that is such a high capacity that it would basically blow up our houses if we were trying to run it through the local lines. So they have to put that onto the high power grid that we see running over there, the 345 kV lines, the 765 kV lines, which are the highest capacity lines that we have here in Indiana. But the point I want to make on this chart is, if you look at Indiana, there's actually two colors there. So this is a chart of the regional transmission systems. They are what I call the traffic cops of power. They determine who produces the power and puts it on the grid and who's going to get it, when it's in demand. They also have a system where it helps market it, just like you see on the stock market. Who's the highest bidder, that's going to get that electron of energy. So we here in Indiana have access to two grid systems. MISO, which is the Mid-Continent Independent Systems Operator, and the PJM, which is the Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland. That means that any power produced here in Indiana, wind, solar, coal, gas, can actually be transported all across the Midwest and all the way out to the East Coast. Now, when we produce an electron of power, and I at my home say, I want renewable energy, and I pay my utility company for renewable energy and it's listed on my bill, am I getting that electron that's actually produced, in the field not too far from me? No. It's the path of least resistance. As long as the utility company can say, we have this many megawatts of renewable energy and this many megawatts of coal, it's wherever the electron goes first. It's not to say, yes, I'm really getting renewable. But that's important to remember, because as we talk about some of the demand, there are a lot of companies that require that percentage of renewable energy. The one other thing I want to point on this chart real quick is, if you look at Texas, that dark green, if you notice, Texas does not have access to any other grid system. And I'm sure you heard here a few years ago that they were basically looking at blackouts. They lost their power, and a lot of, saying, oh, well, it was this, it was that, it was this. Well, the main thing is they didn't have the equipment properly installed for that colder temperature. And so, yes, some of the gas in the pipelines, actually, they weren't insulated enough. The moisture froze. They did have some challenges with the wind turbines because they were not able to handle the cold temperatures. The equipment that's put in here in Indiana is already put in there to basically to deal with the cold temperatures. But Texas couldn't pull power from anyone else, just like they can't give power to anyone else. They're basically an island. That's where Indiana is very fortunate because we do have access to the two grid systems. And so here also shows what has happened in Indiana as far as our type of power. If you look to the far left, 2014, the big blue box there, that is gas. Or no, I take that back. That is coal, sorry. The green is the gas. So as you can tell, years ago, we used to be about 85 to 90% coal production for our energy use here in Indiana. That has steadily declined over the years. Gas has been taking up the majority of that gap for energy production. Yes, wind has come online and taken up some of it, and solar is starting. But again, the transition has been happening for many years of transitioning away from the high volume of coal. And so this is not something new for us. So what's happening here in Indiana, the state activity? Right now, we have 7 operating solar farms, number of facilities. We have 9 that are actually under construction across the state of Indiana. And there's 34 that have received their permit. Basically, they have to apply for a permit through MISO or PJM before they even know if they have a project, or before they even know if they could get a project. And so that's what's happening right now in the solar and wind. We have 20 operating facilities. Majority are in White, Benton, and Randolph counties. And then we have 5 that have actually been permitted that have not started construction yet today. So total for wind and solar, wind, we've had $6.8 billion of capital investment, and we've had $1.7 billion in solar to date. And so those are projects that are happening now. So when I mentioned the economic development side of it, there are companies out there today that want renewable energy. And so this is some of them. I'm sure you've heard of Nucor Steel, Ball Corp, T-Mobile, General Motors, Target, McDonald's, you name it. They have mandates within their companies that they need a certain percentage of their power to come from renewables. And those mandates are not going to go away anytime soon. It's corporate mandates that are driving those. But as a community, if we do not have access to renewable energy, some of our communities here in Indiana have actually lost projects. And they lose these projects before the community even knows they're looking. Because the company has a checklist that says, okay, we're going to expand into wherever we can. Who's got renewable energy? If you don't have it, you're automatically marked off the list. They look at the workforce. They look at several other things, your water and your sewer capacity, your transportation, the logistics. But renewable energy is high on that list. And that's why we say it can impact economic development for a community. And sometimes we don't even know. Domestic companies aren't as strong on renewable energy as the international companies. And so if you look at some of the new companies that have come into Indiana, most of them have been international companies. So I want to get down into the actual projects now, the site selection. I mentioned there are certain things that have to come into play before a project even becomes a project. First of all, they look at the solar capacity. There are actually solar maps out there that anyone can Google and bring up, what is the solar capacity in Indiana? And those are generally developed by the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is a great source that I use quite often. They also have to look at the topography of the land. If there's too many hills, too many trees, some communities mandate you cannot remove trees. Most companies don't like to remove trees, but we have seen some. And so that's the community's responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen if you don't want it to happen, along with the landowner. The landowner has to be very cautious what they put in their lease to make sure that, okay, they're going to take my topsoil, move it away. They have to save it and they have to put it back. That has to be spelled out in the lease. You know, what's going to happen with trees? Again, the county can put that in a zoning ordinance. Trees cannot be removed without the landowner's permission and the county's permission. Those are things that should be spelled out. Land mass. I say there has to be a critical mass. There has to be enough landowners who have signed these leases to have a viable project. There is no eminent domain. Nobody can come and make them sign. It's a landowner choice. But there has to be enough landowners that have said yes before they even know if they're going to have a project. Once they know they have enough landowners signed up, then they can apply for their permit through MISO. Because they can't make a permit to MISO if they don't know if they have a project yet. And they can't make a project if they don't know if they get their MISO permit. Those are two issues that really are sensitive because a lot of communities say, well, they never came and talked to us. They never told us they were doing this project. And you're right, they probably haven't. Just like large economic development projects don't tell you they're in process of a project until they have completed their due diligence. They don't want everybody to know that, do you think Honda stood out there and told everybody, hey, we're looking to come to Indiana and we're going to be here. They already knew that everything was in place, the water, the sewer, what was happening before they announced it publicly. That also has to happen on renewable energy projects. They have to know that everything is in place. They have to complete their due diligence before they make it public. No different than any other economic development project. They have to have the willing landowners and they must have access to that electrical grid through the applications in the queue, what we call with MISO with the app. Okay, so as we dig deeper, again, the timeline to develop a renewable energy project is quite lengthy. There's usually 2 to 3 years that is silent mode. Nobody even knows they're looking. Landowners may, because they've come to them and asked them, are you interested? But the community may not know because they're trying to get everything else lined up to know if it's going to work before they come to the community and ask for zoning changes or special use units, whatever might be needed according to this county's requirements. And then once they start making it public, then that's when they go through the permitting process with the county. And still they're looking at a couple more years before they can even start construction. So you're looking at about a 5 to 6 year timeline. And actually right now it's running about 7 to 8 because MISO and PJM are way behind on their permitting processes. And so the companies, the developers have to make sure they get that MISO permit before they do anything community-wide. Because without the MISO or PJM permit, it doesn't matter how many landowners signed up. They're not able to put that power on the grid. And so, key points on land use. Again, I mentioned I'm from the Department of Ag. And so, and with any business, I also own several businesses. Diversification is key. When we're talking about lands, farms, businesses, and our energy. We cannot put all of our eggs in one basket anymore. We do need diversified energy. So if we lose one source of power, we're not hurting. We have a backup, so to speak. Also, what I consider solar, and this is my opinion from my time at the State Department of Ag. How many have heard of CREP, the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program? Basically the set aside, where a farmer says, you know what, I've been growing corn and soybeans on this field forever. The soil really needs rejuvenating. So they will set aside that land and agree not to grow commodity crops on it. They receive a payment from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to not grow those crops. Those payments were generally for 15 years. They have now extended it up to 25 to 30 years. It's really the same thing as a solar field. You're agreeing not to grow your commodity crops on that field. You're getting a payment, but it's not a payment from our tax dollars through USDA. It's a payment from a private company that's paying you to lease that land. It's real similar in my mind. So also the solar projects have minimal disruption to the soil. I'm very familiar with wind. I work the wind projects too. They disrupt the soil. It's a smaller footprint for each turbine, but a solar field, first of all, the way they pile drive the racking system in, they're basically U-channel that is pile driven into the ground. They use a forklift with a pile driver on the front of it. They don't use a heavy crane. They don't use any heavy equipment. And, they generally can take, they will bring in a semi with the panels on them, and they'll unload it by hand or with that forklift. So again, you're not driving heavy equipment over there. So when the solar energy is no longer needed, it's real easy to pull that racking system back up out of the ground and return the field to arable land. They do not use rocks or concrete in the racking system. They do use concrete in the inverter system, which is a box about the size of a small trailer, not the tractor, just the trailer. And that is what inverts the power. You're going from DC to AC to transport it over the lines. And so that is on a concrete panel or pad. That's the only concrete that is used within the actual solar field itself. So minimum disruption. Yes, drainage tiles could be hit. Again, your landowner lease and your county lease should agreements, not lease, the county agreements should cover drainage tiles. And I'll talk about those in a minute. Wildlife impacts are important. We want to minimize that. I had a landowner say, Connie, I want the solar field because I can't farm anymore. My kids don't want to farm anymore, but I don't want to get rid of my land. And so this is a win-win for me. But I love sitting on my porch in the morning, drinking coffee and watch the deer run from one forest, one woods to the next woods. That's going to ruin it when they put that solar field in there. Says, let's talk with the developer. They actually sit down, talked with the developer, and the developer opened up a wildlife run. And the deer learned quickly. They are now running in between the solar fields. And so communication between the county, the towns, the developer, and the landowners, it was very, very important throughout this whole process. And then, yes, the land can be returned to productive soil. I've had soil specialists test the soil after the solar fields have been in there. And they've used different fields, not just here in Indiana. And they said, yes, the soil is rejuvenated. You're not putting all the chemicals on it. You're not running your heavier equipment over it for planting and harvest. And yes, you do plant vegetation there. And generally that vegetation has deeper roots. So it's going to pull the water down into the ground deeper and help it rejuvenate. And so those are important things to remember as you're going through this process. Okay. And so the zoning ordinance, which is the most important document for these development projects. I want to remind everyone, the zoning ordinance is about land use, not economics. However, what you put in that zoning ordinance is very important and may impact the county's economics far beyond just this project. So that's one thing I try to keep in my mind all the time whenever we're talking about zoning ordinances around the state. And so, important points to remember in the zoning ordinance, landowner rights. I look at myself from working in the Department of Ag. Who were we to tell a farmer that he had to continue farming if that was not his choice? But he wanted to maintain ownership of that land. This gives them an option. Critical mass is needed for any project. So in other words, if you don't have enough landowners that have signed leases with a developer, there is not going to be a project. But if you do have enough landowners that have signed leases for this project, that should tell you something. That we have enough supporters. Are they going to stand up and talk about it? Probably not. Farmers are that way. I keep saying farmers are our worst enemy. My father farmed for years. And it's because we don't talk about things in the farm industry the way we should. And so it's landowner's choice. And most important, the Senate bill that was passed a couple of years ago is not a mandate. It is a recommendation. And so when you look at that, Senate Bill 390 encourages consistent standards throughout Indiana, provides incentives for counties to be designated renewable energy if they meet those standards of regulations. And then Senate Bill 411 also has those default standards for solar and wind and is designated, or that designation is required to receive state incentives. I'll be the first to tell you, there's no money in that bunch. They set the regulation, they set the code, but they have not put any money in the state budget. But still, there are some counties that said, well, maybe one of these days they will. And so we're gonna go ahead and meet those standards. That was that community's choice. And that, so I stress, that is not a mandate for anybody. You need to set your setbacks and such based on your community. And that's the problem. I will tell that to people time and time again. I will also say White County is actually too lax on their solar. They only had 50-foot setbacks. That's too short, way too short. And they now have a moratorium on their solar and wind and battery storage so they can rewrite their zoning ordinance. And so they are in that process right now. So precise language that does need to be in zoning ordinance. Define the type of solar. And you can pick the term you want, commercial, non-commercial, industrial, individual, residential, but make sure it's spelled out with the definition of what you need and be consistent throughout your ordinance. Define the setbacks, not just to say, we want a 200-foot setback from the property to the solar. Well, what point on the property? Is it the property line? Is it the corner of the house? Is it the solar project? Is it the fence? Is it a solar panel? You need to be specific and think about how you're going to enforce that and who's going to measure. Okay? There are certain things that must be done prior to any permitting. Yes, you can change the zoning, but generally you will have an improvement location permit required before they can actually start building. So you need to make sure the county has a road use and ditch maintenance agreement, an economic development agreement, energy commissioning agreement. And there's one more agreement for solar that I'll talk about here in just a minute. The other thing, every landowner should have the right to waive that setback if they so choose. There are participating landowners, meaning they've signed a lease. There are non-participating landowners who said, no, we don't want it on our property. We're not signing a lease. But each should have the right to waive any setback if they wish. So in other words, I've had farmers tell me and landowners say, you know what? I don't want a 200-foot setback from the project. I would rather they come right up to my property line. It's on the back 40. I'll never farm that. It's a pain to get my tractor, a 24-row corn planter out there on a small acreage. So again, that farmer would say, hey, I waive that setback. They can go right up to my property line. Landowner choice. And again, make sure you have a clear process and timeline through this. So things to consider for solar specifically. Setbacks. Again, I mentioned participating, non-participating, and the right to waive. Screening. Yes, fencing is required around solar fields. But what type of fencing? Stop and think about this. What type of fencing is out there today on all your cornfields? Are you now going to require something different that could actually, after a few winters, look not so nice? And so stop and think about what you're requiring. Generally, it's chain link fence that goes up there. But if you start telling them to put slats in, stop and think about animal, running up to them, wind, especially in this area. We have stronger winds, and so it can destroy those slats that go through some of those fencing. So things to think about, or make it, what I'd encourage a lot of communities, make it negotiable. Whether it's your planning director that has the authority that the developer needs to come and say, we propose this. And the planning director says, no, I don't think that's what we want. Let's talk about it. And then trees. Again, stop and think. They're not going to put, 30-foot trees in on day one. They're going to start with smaller trees. Well, okay, what are those trees doing? Is it really protecting, or would it be better to have shrubs? I discourage berms because berms impact water flows. So stop and think about it. If you're gonna do berms with trees or shrubs on top of it, you're now hindering water flows throughout those fields. So something to consider. And then every solar project, instead of spelling out in the ordinance, the type of seed mix that you want in there, get local input from your landowner and from your soil specialist to say, what's appropriate for this field may not be the same for the field across the road. Every soil type is different. Is it a sandy loam? Is it clay? Whatever it might be, it's important to make that general enough in the ordinance, but then require a vegetation plan that spells it out. That again, your planning director has authority to say, yes, this will work. We agree with this. And again, get your landowner's input. So very important on those. Agrivoltaics. We have 1,000 sheep grazing in solar fields today here in Indiana. There's about 435, I think, over in Jasper County. There's 600 and some up in Stark County. They're actually grazing hogs up in Stark County also. They're not the normal breed of hogs. They're coonies, which are a shorter stature. They eat less, but they're grazers. Their snouts are different structure that they do not root in the ground. So there's no concern about them, rooting around the racking system. Some people have tried, actually Purdue is trying to graze cattle. They're actually increasing the height of the solar fields and putting cattle underneath. There's actually some different breeds that are shorter stature. I have concerns because cattle like to rub, and so I'm not sure of that one yet, but Purdue's trying it already. They're also working on a slower or a higher, I'm sorry, I need more coffee or something. Purdue is working on a lower stature corn. They actually have a new hybrid corn that doesn't grow as tall. And they're looking at putting those under the solar fields also. But solar is great for other things too. Purdue has tested melons, pumpkins, cantaloupe, all grow very well under the solar fields. And so again, these are things to talk about between the landowner and the developer before they finalize any of their plans. Specialty crops. Anything that is hand harvested grows very well under the solar fields. And people say, oh, but it's all shade. No, the panels rotate depending on the sun. So yes, they do get some sun, but that's why they show the pumpkins actually like that little bit of shade. And so they grow better. Strawberries is another one. Beets. Some farmers, there's actually a site up north of Fort Wayne where they are raising honeybees. They're capturing that honey, they're giving it to the local brewery and winery, and they're making a honey mead. I haven't tasted it yet, but it sounds good. And so there's a lot of opportunities that we have been working on within, this agrivoltaic side of the solar fields. Okay. So there's a lot of resources out there in zoning ordinances. The Center for Infrastructure and Economic Development, that's the group that I work with. We have ordinances because we are national. We have several from here in Indiana. We also have from other states. Then IU, the Environmental Resilience Institute, developed a model ordinance that is available to look at. Now, I caution communities, don't just take that model, write out the name and write in Wabash County or, whatever it might be, because that model is a good starting point to ask questions and to give you something to think about. Just like I'm not going to sit here and tell you need a setback of X, Y, or Z. You need to look at what your other setbacks are for other type of zoning districts within the county. If you only have a 50-foot setback, and I'm just picking a number, on an industrial building that has trucks driving in it every day, that has odor, that has a lot of sound, then I question, why is your setback on a solar that doesn't have equipment after construction, doesn't have sound, and doesn't have an odor being produced? So compare it to what other setbacks you have within your current ordinance. And then Purdue actually did an ordinance inventory a couple of years ago. With our step, the federal grant that we have, we will be updating that this summer, spring and summer, they're starting now. And so we will research all zoning ordinances for wind and solar across the state. And they will link them into that site, so you can look at them. And we're actually trying to do a summary page this time that will really make it easier for people to see the differences. Okay. Couple of other points, items that must be negotiated outside of the ordinance. You know, there might be some assets that the landowner says, you know, it's okay if they leave that fence. I really want to start the grazing sheet, and that fence is fine if they're no longer using it. Again, communication of what should or shouldn't be removed. Generally, all energy assets should be removed. They generally remove all components 36 to 48 inches below ground level. On the wind farms, we always say 48 inches, remove everything. Solar, they'll go down 36 because they don't have near the volume of equipment, energy equipment under the panels. Specifics of the agreements, I'll talk about here in a minute. The specifics should not be listed in your zoning ordinance, just the requirement. Yes, we require that there is an economic development, road use and decommissioning, but don't try to sit there and figure out, well, now what should that bond be and how much do we want to ask for? That's a negotiating tool between the community and the developer. Use it that way. And then that's where the detailed financial matters. The zoning ordinance is not the place for that. And then pilot versus EDA. Those are two different things, and use caution with the wording on that. And I'll explain that here in just a moment. So I'm going to go to economic development agreement. Every economic development project out there should have one of these, whether it's a hotel, whether it's an industrial facility, whether it's Walmart or, you know, Dollar General, which we're seeing them pop up everywhere now. And so that economic development agreement is going to spell out the developer is going to build a solar project, cover this many acres, produce this much energy, employ this many people at this wage. The county is saying, okay, if you do all of that, we will encourage the consideration of tax abatement in some cases. Again, you're not going to spell that out yet until it goes through the proper due diligence of public hearings. But, you know, that's where you put down who's doing what and when, basically. That economic development agreement also allows for the county to request an economic development payment. An economic development payment is not a pilot, and it is not taxes. So what it says is, okay, if we give you tax abatement, some counties do not, some counties do. Some counties will actually give 100% tax abatement every year for 20 years. Don't ask me why. I like the phase in myself. You know, let's not give them the whole world. Let's, you know, phase it in, you know, your 10%, 20%, 30% phase in over 10 years or so. But then if you give them that tax abatement, you ask the developer then for some money. Say, okay, we're giving you that incentive. We want you to pay us so much per megawatt in an economic development payment up front. Now, usually it'll come in the first 2 or 3 years. Again, you can negotiate that. I believe Stark County is doing a 20-year tax abatement, 100%, 20 years, and they're receiving an economic development payment every year for 20 years. Why? Why don't they just say the heck with the tax abatement? The economic development payments have no statutory requirement for taxes. Those dollars can go into a fund the community sets up, and the community decides how those dollars are spent. Flexible dollars. They cannot come back and say, you have to give them to the taxing units. If you should decide to give some of that money to a school and say, here's $1 million, you know, go do what you want. It does not affect their tax levy. Flexible dollars. And that is spelled out up front. And counties are willing to share those agreements with communities that are going through this, so you can see examples. Road use and ditch maintenance. We required the company to come in and videotape all the roads they were going to use, to map out that said, we're only using these roads. We have signs up there, solar traffic only on this road. And then we had them put a bond in place up front before the permit was issued that said, okay, if we walk away tomorrow, or if we don't return these roads to the same condition they were in when it started, if not better, the county has money in the bank to repair those roads. You determine on how many miles of roads. Generally, I think it's about $500,000 for 1 mile of county road. And that's not a heavy haul road. But, you know, again, you figure out how many miles roads, what it's gonna cost, and you make them put a bond or financial assurance, could be a letter of credit, set aside up front in the community's name. We have over 100 miles of renewed county roads in White County at no cost to the county. Actually, we have one road they call Interstate White County because it's almost better than I-65. You know, it's a heavy haul road and it's widened and it's in great shape. So again, negotiating tool for you. Again, this is where your ditch maintenance goes in, for your public ditches. The landowner leases should cover the private ditches to make sure they are protected and that water is not flowing where it should be. That's an important part of the landowner lease. Vegetation plan, I already talked about, there needs to be a vegetation plan included upfront before permitted, that somebody here within the county has control to determine, yes, that's good, no, that's not, what type of seed mix they are going to plant in certain areas, et cetera. And then the decommissioning. This is one of the things I hear most often from the opponents, that they say, well, you know, the company could walk away and we're left with all of this in the field. What are we going to do? This decommissioning plan requires, again, a bond or financial assurance to be set up in the county or community's name before they're permitted. And that stays in place for as long as the project is there. And you usually review it every 3 to 5 years to say, okay, first of all, you hire a third party that you don't pay for it. The developer pays for it, the third party to come in and say, it's going to cost, I'm just picking it at $10 million to remove all components of this solar field. And so you say, okay, well, we'll issue a bond for, you know, the cost plus 10%. And then every 3 to 5 years, we're going to review that cost and see if it needs to be increased. Generally never decreased. But again, that's protecting the county, that bond is there for the life of the project. That the county can then go in, hire somebody to come in and remove all the components. I also encourage you to ask for salvage rights in that agreement. Because there's a lot of steel and copper there. That's worth some things too. Okay, so I mentioned economic development payment versus pilot. Benton County learned this the hard way. Payment is just what payment in lieu of taxes, pilot is just what it says. If you are collecting a pilot, and you have that wording in your economic development agreement, you had better be dispersing those funds per your tax levies. No question asked. Those are not flexible dollars. I do recommend, though, that you might include both of those in your agreements. You get your economic development payment up front, spell that out in the first 2 to 3 or 5 years. And then you set a pilot clause in there that says, okay, if our state decides to change the tax law or the assessment, the developer agrees to continue paying taxes at the last known rate. So you will not be out taxes at any point down the road. Benton County didn't, they actually called their first agreement pilot. They were sued by their school corporation saying, we want those pilot payments, their taxes that should be coming to us through the tax levy. And so, you know, that's important. Then, again, there is a federal law out there that says if a new buyer comes in and buys an energy production facility, such as a solar or wind field, they have the right to take their assessment down to zero. Guess what that does to the taxes for that community? Basically wipes them out. Thankfully, our legislators have worked on that, and they have, they put an Indiana code in, a regulation in that says that cannot be allowed here in Indiana. And so they're protecting that, but again, just things to keep in mind as you go through this process. And so, restored assessed valuation. As we all know, what happens when assessed valuation goes up in a county? Generally, tax rates go down. So here's what happened in Henry County. Over 5 years, they kept losing assessed valuation year after year after year. And then they realized, hey, wait a minute, if we bring in that solar field that's been working out there, and you can see right when that happened, when all of a sudden it turned to green and their assessed valuation started going up as the tax abatement rolled off. And so adding a $250 million assessed valuation to the county's books does help lower the tax rates for everyone in the county, not just where the project is located. And I know from example, the convenience store in Monticello, not next to the renewable energy projects, my daughter was managing it for us and she kept saying, Mom, got the tax bill again. It went down. Yep. That's thanks to the wind farm as the tax abatement rolls off. We weren't even close to the wind farms, but that affected us positively. Okay. And so another thing, this is an example from Benton County. When they started the wind farm, they were the first county by the way, that had wind farms here in Indiana. They were looking at a town rate of $3.49 per $100 of assessed valuation. Their average tax rate was $2.87. The project came online that following year, and as the tax abatement started to roll off, and developers started to pay more taxes, you can see what happened with the overall tax rates in the county, down to $2.73 on their town rate and $1.61 on their average rate overall. So yes, these projects do help everyone in the county. Now, one thing community officials need to consider is the cost of community services. This is a study done by Larry DeBoer out of Purdue University. We receive our tax dollars in. For residential development, for every dollar that residents pays in taxes into the county, it is costing the county $1.15 to provide the needed services. And these are Wabash County numbers. For every business that is paying taxes for every dollar, hey, they're saving some money. It's only costing the county 56 cents. But for agricultural projects, and that's what these projects are, in agricultural zone land, unless you're changing your zoning, then that's a whole nother story. But most keep them zoned ag with special use permits. It's only costing the county 22 cents to provide the needed services. That might be your police, your fire department. If it's in town, it could be your water, your wastewater, other things that you as a community provide. And so what that means that any project going into an ag area, and this even includes confined feeding operations, more of that dollar is going to pay for every residence out there to get their needed services. And so that's, so as we look at renewable energy projects, they really are similar to economic development projects. They do add assessed valuation to the county. They do decrease the tax rates, which is what we all want. They do help improve infrastructure, such as the roads. And again, these are things that you can all negotiate in those economic development agreements. No, they do not add a great number of jobs. But if you look at a rural community, such as White County, we've got, 26,000 population total. 13,000 workforce, and we might have 1,200, 1,300 that are not working today. If I were to try to bring in a manufacturing facility of the next Honda plant that could employ 2,000 or 3,000, we wouldn't have enough employees to fill those positions without hurting every other company out there. And we wouldn't have enough houses to house them. So these renewable energy projects are good for rural communities. And so we consider those lease payments the same as jobs because it is putting money in the pockets of those landowners. And so just a couple of things left here on some examples of what has happened in other communities. Benton County, they use their economic development funds to put fiber direct to the home for 75% of their population. They couldn't have done that without the wind farms in Benton County. Randolph County, this is about the only county that we are aware of in Indiana that actually went after wind and solar. They use that as their economic development strategy. And they do have both wind and solar projects. So over 10 years, they gave $1 million to the Randolph Southern School Corporation to put in new bleachers, improve their running track, playground, new school roof chiller. It did not affect their tax levy. Just those economic development payments. And then again, this is showing how much went into the sheriffs, the EMT vehicles that they bought. 3.2 million went to improve roads, water, bridge. I know your Cume Bridge funds are probably the ones that are hit the hardest. Your courthouse HVAC system. They paid 4-H membership for every 5th grader in Randolph County. You couldn't do that with tax dollars. White County actually bought laptops for the high schools, in addition to using it to be a match on a grant to develop an industrial park for water and wastewater. And this is what happened in White County. We have, like I said, 801 megawatts, actually more than that now because they've got a new one online. Because of the wind and solar together, they have over 58 permanent employees. It's been a capital investment of $1.4 billion in White County. And there has been over $21 million going into the local government fund that they have flexibility on how that is spent. In addition to the 26 million that goes to the landowners. And as I mentioned, the 100+ miles of renewed county roads. How many have heard of Indiana Beach? Well, Indiana Beach brings in $60 million economic impact to White County every year from the tourism. A few years ago, they announced that they were going to close down. File bankruptcy, they were done. The county would have been devastated. They had the wind farm fund, which were the economic development payments, but they said, you know what, we can use some of that money as an incentive to incentivize a new owner to the beach. So they did. They offered a $3 million incentive to anyone who was going to buy the beach. That $3 million was a loan, but it was forgivable if they stayed in operation. I believe it was for three years. They're still up and running, and it's been about 5 years now. They could not have done that with any of the county's funds or tax dollars. And so you can be creative. I call it creative financing that. And so when I talk about economic development, these projects do attract other things. Again, another comment I hear often is, well, all these panels are coming from China or someplace else. We actually have 3 facilities right here in Indiana. 2 are in production making solar panels. Canadian Solar in Jeffersonville, that one is still under construction. Crossroads Solar in South Bend, and High Tech Solar in Michigan City. So the reason those companies are here is because we have the solar projects here. So it does attract other economic development opportunities. And then the other thing is like, oh, all these panels are going to go to waste. There is recycling of these panels. About 85 to 90% of every component in those solar panels is recyclable. We have a company up in South Bend that is already recycling them. So if they have a new solar field that brings in a new shipment and there's some of them broken, they hold them until they get a Gaylord filled. And then they call this recycling company to come and pick them up. they tear them apart, the aluminum outside, there is no liquid inside these components. The glass is such that, yes, if they do shatter, it's going to a spider, but it is not going to break apart and flow out, or cover the grass. We actually had a tornado go through White County and through the solar field. Yes, it was a mess, more the fencing than the panels. And so, they're even doing more and more about recycling. We're not seeing a lot of recycling facilities yet because there's not a demand. You don't want to start a company if there's no demand for it yet. You will build as the demand grows. And so that's a lot of what I have today to talk about. I welcome any questions. And before I start, I'm going to give you the water.
Yeah, I'll take a minute. Thank you very, very much for that information. Now for the order of business, we're going to go ahead and the commission, if you have any questions. I have a few and they're just kind of all over the place. I wish they were in, so. This is regarding people in the zoning boundary, and that's I live in the zoning boundary.
What I call the buffer.
The buffer zone, yes. So, I knew we were talking about, the waivers. So if the landowner's choice, the leasing landowner says, you know what, I want to waive those setbacks, I want to waive this. But yet, their abutting landowner says, well, wait a minute, no, we don't want that. Is that taken into consideration and that may be a non-leasing landowner, but they don't agree, how is that handled?
That's the communication side of it. Again, the landowner that the panels are on has the right to decide the waiver and where they go. So if it's a non-participating landowner, they're not going to have panels on their property. And it's generally it's not going to be the neighbor's property line adjoining. It's usually going to be, this is my property line, it's on both sides. You can waive it.
Okay.
Again, that's something you can spell out in your zoning ordinance too, to make sure that the one waiving must have ownership of parcels on both sides of the property line.
So if the property owner, the property leaser, the person who's leasing, can waive the restrictions, but how does that affect then the restrictions that we place in a zone? How does it affect our zoning? If they can say, oh, no, I don't need that, I don't want that, but yet it's in direct, disagreement with what we've already put in place.
That's why you have to have the right to waive inside written in your zoning ordinance. So you may have a 300-foot setback from a property line. And you can say, but we allow the landowner, the participating, you can say participating, non-participating, to waive that setback if they own parcels on both sides of the property. You can spell it out. By putting that in your zoning ordinance, that gives them the right to waive.
I guess I'm wondering if that right to waive, why do we even have a zoning ordinance or a restrictive covenant on? Is that just a starting point? And then the waiver, the negotiation is taken from that point.
You're not going to have a lot of people sign that waiver. I mean, you're giving consideration to the landowner who wishes to waive.
Okay,
But no, it's not gonna be carte blanche out there.
okay, that's kind of what
I've not seen that happen anywhere.
It's my understanding that we're talking about a landowner that owns two parcels of land and waiving it just for himself.
Okay. Don't want to affect it.
So if his boundary is next to somebody else's land, he can't waive it for that other party.
Okay, and that's primarily, I was talking about, thinking about the abutment.
No, I think
Because it's
it's
adjoining
talking.
property line, so both parties would have to waive it to make that happen.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. You were talking about wildlife impacts. Communication with the developer, talking about land can be returned back to soil rejuvenation. How many farms in your tenure have been returned back to Ag 1 farmland successfully?
Here in Indiana, none to date. There have been some out west. What we see happening more, and we haven't seen it yet because these solar fields here in Indiana are still fairly new. But in your agreements, you will want to talk about, what we call retooling. So as technology improves, the developer may come along and say, you know what, we have new panels. So in other words, they started with single facial panels. They were only collecting the photons from the sun on one side. Now you can actually buy bifacial panels where they're actually collecting where it reflects off the ground. And so you're producing more power. Well, as technology changes, the developer may say, you know what, we want to change out all the panels and produce more energy, but they can't just automatically produce energy because they only have a permit to put X number of megawatts on the grid. So what may happen is they may take out some of those rows of solar panels because they don't need them anymore. We are seeing that happen with the wind turbines also, but we've not seen that happen here in Indiana.
So you have not yourself witnessed it being successfully turned back to Ag One land yet?
No, I've worked with the National Renewable Energy Lab that does research all of that. And so I've worked with them in the Argonne National Lab up in Illinois. They have research on those where it does turn back to arable land.
Okay, and then the second question I have, you had talked about tree removal as some requirements that could happen for some landowners. You know, DNR here in Indiana, it's very stringent on some tree removal. There's certain times of the years that you can't touch trees per requirements like brown bat and things like that. Has the DNR ever interfered with some property owners, maybe where they have stopped some of that happening due
Not
to
that
some
I'm
of their
aware of.
requirements?
Not that I'm aware of, because the project, before it even gets to local permitting, it usually has several state and federal permits that they have to have reviewed and to review the project, review the site. And I'll use an example. In White County, we actually have a bat nesting area, so they have to stay away from that whole area.
Okay.
So they have to do those studies, wildlife studies, the cranes, sandhill cranes. Again, what we see now happening with the sandhill cranes, they're actually nesting within the solar fields. They are coming down and landing right on them. They're not hot to touch. You're not going to burn yourself. And so, because I've been out there in the middle of a field and touching everything. Is it hot? Is it hot? No, your car actually gets hotter when you touch the outside after it's been
No,
set.
I'm not talking about the actual solar panels. I'm talking about tree removal.
Right, the tree, if they
You're
come in,
setting up the solar fields. I didn't know if DNR actually could intervene on stopping tree removal to set up a solar
they
field.
would have to have that reviewed before it even
Okay.
started.
Got it.
And again, that's key to the landowner. But there was one area where they did have some trees removed because the landowner wanted those trees removed. So again, that's where I caution landowners need to make sure those leases state if they do not want any tree removal. Because there could be a bad row of scrub trees that they need to be taken out, and it's like, okay, we'll let them take them out. But again, communication with the landowners and with all of the proper regulatory authorities.
And last question, has IDEM ever gotten involved with anything on soil removal for any property owners to your knowledge?
There was a project in Jasper County where there was a complaint that the solar company did come in and take down a sandhill. Now, I reviewed everything. I talked with all sides, landowners and developer, and I did not find that the developer was in error. I think it was a miscommunication, honestly, that happened. But no, there was no item permitting or issue with that I ever heard about. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Connie, what is the oldest solar field here in Indiana currently?
The oldest one would be the
This ballpark.
Randolph County. They've only been up and running about 4 years. If that, yeah, that's probably pushing it. Because it was my last year at the state when we did the groundbreaking up in Stark County that they started construction. And so that was in the end of 2019.
You said most of the solar panels don't have liquid in them now. I mean, if you
None
go
of them,
online,
none of them have liquid in them.
did they used to? I mean,
No,
like antifreeze for de-icing and all that stuff you read about. That's all
The
fake.
sun heating it up enough to keep the ice off is more than enough. They, and plus when they slide up, you know, basically any ice or snow will pretty much fall off. They do have maintenance crews out there that if there is an issue, they may go out there and wipe them, but they've not had to here, that I've been aware of in Indiana especially. So no, there's never, no liquid in them. Now, they did use different metals in some of them, but even those, what is it, cadmium telluride, but that's not used in the panels today that are produced. They used to be.
Kind of on that same note, what's the biggest misconception that you find, as people are, these ordinances?
A lot of it has, well, there's several. Can I repeat that? Okay, just like I said, there's liquid inside there. It's going to leach out and destroy the water table. Doesn't happen. It's going to decrease our property values. We have a recent study. We've had several studies done by universities. The most recent one was by Loyola University that actually studied solar projects here in Indiana and the whole Midwest. And they show that there's actually an increase in property values in rural areas. That's different from metropolitan areas. So if you have a highly metropolitan, highly urbanized area, yes, it can decrease your property values. But for rural, they said most people like them. So that's a big one, the property value. I'm trying to think of one of the others that I hear a lot. Like I said, those are the two main ones.
I know Mary asked about the oldest in the state of Indiana. How about in the Midwest area? Do you know of any that have reached 10 or 15 years old or have been decommissioned for any reason?
No, we'd probably have to go out west. Those are the ones that are up there in 15 to 20 years in operation. And they are the older panels too. But, and that is a good point that it made me remember. So a lot of people say, well, there's a lot more land out west. Why aren't you building them out west? You're right, there's a lot more land, but the electrical grid is not there that can transport that power to where the demand is. And that's why we're seeing more of the development in this area now.
Any other questions from the planning commission? At this time, Connie, did you get enough drink?
Yes, thank you.
I'd like to open it up to anyone here in the audience that would like to ask a question. And again, I'd just like to remind you that we would just prefer a question that Connie can address straightforwardly. At the end of before the meeting is ended, if you have a comment or a rebuttal, that will give you time for that as well. But this is primarily a question that maybe you want further explanation of. Okay. And if you'd like to have a question, or just please come on up to the mic and just state your name, please. And again, I have asked that you've signed in.
Want me to read off the names?
I told everybody that we wouldn't do.
Oh, okay.
Would you like to come up? I'll start. It's off, girl. Thank you.
Peter Metzger. I have a question and maybe Mr. Lehman can help me with this. Renewable energy in an eminent domain. Have you been following that with
No.
federal or state?
Nothing particular.
Would it override local zoning laws, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, I mean, the city has its zoning ordinance. If the state comes in, the state can always trump the city. And likewise, the federal government can trump the state. So, if they do that now, whether or not they'll do that, one never knows.
Connie, do you
May
have
I
any
add
comments?
some- yeah.
Sure.
There is no eminent domain allowed on wind or solar or battery energy storage.
Not yet.
Well, let me finish. Because they are private companies. They are not cities or towns or governments, which does have eminent domain. There is regulation in process today that would look at providing state siting authority. It is not eminent domain. It is saying the state must approve a project first, but then it still ultimately has to come back to the locality to make the final decision. But it is, again, it is not, it cannot take eminent domain because those are not utility companies.
Okay. There's one right there.
Chris Hickman, with the eminent domain, what if a company that's leasing the land for solar or wind sells that lease to Duke Energy? Now suddenly Duke Energy has the power for eminent domain, in which case all gloves are off. Right? Is that right?
And I don't know all of that, so I'm gonna, make that clear up front. I do know that a lot of times the developer must have a power purchase agreement to sell the power. And what has happened in White County and in Jasper County, that after the projects were built, the utility came in and bought them. But the eminent domain occurs during the construction phase, not after it's already operating.
Because my thought with eminent domain, if they say, that'd be a little parcel there, that would work out nice for us. That's a concern I have, because now a small project turns out to be a huge project that nobody has control over.
Yeah, like I said, when a developer, a private entity has the lease to build and they build, there is no eminent domain. After the project, if a utility does come in, again, we're waiting to see what the state legislation is going to do, which is everybody's best guess right now. But again, if the utility buys the project after it's operating, there's no need for eminent domain, because again, they have a permit through MISO or PJM to only put X number of megawatts of power on the grid. So they can't automatically increase it with going back through the whole process.
Right, I understand that, but there's still the potential. There could be the potential down the road. That's all I'm pointing out. Is that if they apply to MISO and say, we would like, then the land surrounding the area that they have could potentially be up for eminent domain, that if they can prove a need. That's
Yeah, I need to do.
But on the other hand, there's nothing this plan commission in our ordinance can do to prevent that.
right, I understand that too. But once a lease is in and once it's been given over, then that can open up a can of worms, and we don't really know at this point.
Eminent domain generally runs into play, and Mr. Lehman, you can, enforce me on this one, but generally comes into play on public utilities. Correct?
Correct.
Which is water, wastewater, roads and such. These solar projects are not public utilities. They are not serving the public directly. They are going on the high power lines only. They cannot feed any of our transmission lines that are running to your homes. So I actually made a note to myself to do some checking on that, just to clarify, because, my first thought is they're not a public utility, even if they buy that solar. A public utility may be buying it, but the solar field is not a public utility. It's not a transmission line. It's not feeding the public in that area, which is when eminent domain comes into play, if I'm correct.
Yeah, only a public utility or the government would have the right to eminent domain.
But I am going to do some more checking on that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Ron Eagle.
I live in the buffer zone as well. A couple questions. First off, your comment about the property values actually going up. My wife's cousin literally lives across the road from the Monticello solar plant south of the airport on the west side of the road. He would beg to differ with that. He's going to sell and build, and he's not going to get out of his property what he got in it. And he's right across the road. So that's not always true. I would ask you as a board not to adjust the setback.
And
This is question time.
yeah, Ron, at this point, just we'll go ahead and so
Okay.
that time you will have your choice,
Okay.
your chance.
All right, I'll ask a question. How many, you said there's a minimum amount of acreage that makes it feasible for, what is that?
It depends on their permit, on how many megawatts they are allowed to put on the grid. So, you know, every project is different on what minimum acreage. It depends on the lie of the land. So there isn't a rule of thumb. It's got to be 100 acres. What we are seeing happen generally in a 200 megawatt project, they will need between 1,200 and 1,500 acres, but they do not put panels on 1,200 or 1,500 acres. They are only going to put panels on about 40 to 50% of that land
Okay.
because of the setbacks and such.
So you said that, grazing animals, or the manual labor picking of crops are okay. Well, aren't you, I don't know how many how many hogs it would take to keep, that ground in, chewed down and not a weed patch. Aren't you putting a lot of, manure above ground that would be subject to the runoff that you don't want to control with the berm the berm could be put up to help with sound? And, there's gonna be a lot of manure. How many head of hog on it was gonna take for 1,200 or 1,500 acres? Or the manual labor cost to hand pick crops from that, that's gonna be, if they make enough money off of it to do that. To pay
Yes
the
and yes.
labor, right?
So what is happening with the agrivoltaic side is the developer is looking at this land because they have to pay for the ongoing maintenance. To keep the weeds down, to keep the grass mowed. And so, first of all, the type of hog, it's not your Durocs or anything. It is generally these cooney hogs that they are grazing because they eat less and they take care of business less. And so that is one thing, but most of them are putting the sheep because they are grazers and they will keep it down. They move the sheep. Basically they make paddocks. They will come in and put movable fencing out and they'll say, okay, you're in this area and then we're going to move them to this area. So they move them across the field as needed. There's actually enough room, based on what I'm hearing from several developers, that we could easily add 16,000 sheep here in Indiana on the solar fields that would cover. Now, again, from an economic development standpoint, I'm not going to get into all of it, but the first thing we have to deal with on that is finding a market for that sheep and the processing. So they're not going to increase it overnight by any means. But yeah, there could be some additional maintenance that the developer must pay for to maintain that field, to whether it's collecting the manure or whether it's mowing where it needs to be. They are still responsible for that. What this is doing is providing either the landowner, if he so chooses, a second income stream, or we're actually working on providing beginning farmers that opportunity to become sheep herders, because then every plan is different for every developer. They have a plan of how they will buy the sheep and then basically contract them for a sheep herder to raise and manage the farm. There also has to be winter housing put in for some of them too. So that is all being considered in this whole overall plan, and they are looking at all of it. But you're right, are they going to eat down every section of that field that they need be? No, there will have to be additional mowing and maintenance done. And that's the developer's responsibility. And it's only if the landowner says, yes, I want to do that. Or if the landowner says, you go ahead and do what you want. I'm leasing it, it's still my land, but maybe my son will come in and graze sheep. So it's a conversation, communication across all the parties that have to happen before that is done. There's been a lot of talking on those two fields that are under sheep grazing at this point in time.
And the raising crops on or the hand, like melons or whatever, it seems to me the manual labor involved to hand pick 1,200 or 1,500 acres, it wouldn't be feasible to do that.
And that's the choice of the developer and the landowner. I mean, no one is saying that you have to do that. at this point, yeah.
And Rod, you'll be able to make further comments.
I will. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to let you know. Anyone else? Question?
Can I go again?
You can have another turn, just a minute, please.
Pam Hawkins, and, forgive me if I missed this, but, when you were talking about the economic development payments, where do those come from?
From the developer
The developer?
pays that, yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, developer pays that, I'm sorry, I didn't have that.
To the city.
That would have to be in the agreement. So when you have a city buffer zone and a county, you would want to talk with the county if you want to do one economic development agreement that all parties sign and spells out who gets what, or if you want to do two separate economic development agreements, one for the county if they have solar fields and one for the city if they have solar fields in their buffer zone. So that's a negotiation between the county and the city on how that should be worked out.
Because that's like the second part of my question. We're talking about the city
Mhm.
and the buffer zone.
Yes.
So, we are regulated by the city, but we, give city services or county services. So I feel like that's a lot of room for, conflict or, errors or misunderstandings or, I'm sure we're not the only ones, but, that this has happened to, but I feel like that could be, kind of a gray area in some situations.
Again, it's negotiation and communication. Newton County is going through this right now. They've got actually two towns that projects are looking at in their buffer zones in the county too. The county actually put a moratorium on just December 31st, the last hurrah of the outgoing commissioners. And so now the new commissioners are looking at, redoing the zoning ordinance and negotiating that. But the two towns in there say, well, we still want these projects. And they're looking at how much is in the buffer and is the whole project going to be enough within the buffer zone, or does it have to outlie into the county section? And it's the town needs financial benefits. And so that's, again, negotiation. Again, I mean, I have high hopes for all of our county elected officials. I've been very fortunate in White County. County commissioners and county council met every month together and talked about these. The mayor of the cities was always in those meetings too. And so I think a lot of it, we have to give our elected officials some credit for being able to talk and negotiate.
Oh, and we do. But, we are not 100% city and we're not 100% county. I mean, we don't even have the city council representative. So, we're not really sure where we belong. So that's why I have these questions.
I think that's an excellent question though, because specifically in our area, especially on the south side of the county, it's very, I think, theoretically very reasonable that one project would cross into both, and we already know that could happen. So I think that's something we really do need to think of and address just for that reason, Connie. Thank you.
Yep. And then I have a couple of questions. I'm sorry. Very inquisitive. Do you know how many, crop producing farmable acres have been converted to wind or solar in the state of Indiana? Or pending actively?
I don't think my chart actually showed the number of acres out there, but it's probably in about 30,000 plus at this point in time, with the potential. Percentage wise from USDA, it's less than 2% of our total cropland that has been converted to solar. What the Indiana State Department of Agriculture did a study that was just released here in June of 2024 that said how much acreage we have lost of farmland over the last 12 years. What is really amazing, and it was like 320,000 acres, but all of that, the largest percent was due to residential development.
Understood,
Yeah.
and, now we, enhance that with, land for renewable energies that, and this is my opinion, may or may not be the answer.
And I would agree there.
Yeah, so I Okay, I'm not gonna give my opinion.
Okay, you're gonna have a chance to give your opinion.
That's
okay?
right, that's right.
No, and I would agree. Can wind and solar take over everything? No. I will be the first to tell you, no. We do need diverse. We do need all types of energy. Is this the best technology we have today to utilize and to help decrease that gap between our supply and demand? Just like on your cell phone, if your cell phone breaks, you're not gonna, oh, I'm gonna wait, 'cause next year they're gonna come out with a newer model. You use what you have in hopes that, when new technology comes out, you can change. And I guess that's the difference that I see between wind and solar. Solar is much easier to remove than wind turbines.
Yeah. I still have some questions about, how the land is returned to, its former condition, after solar moves out. You compared the leasing your ground to solar as, similar to the, prep program. And I just beg to differ with that a little bit. On one instance, you're just not farming your ground and you're letting, nature take it back over, the birds and everything. And then the other, you're taking all the topsoil off and you're, digging holes in the ground, 3 foot or whatever, possibly destroying ditches and stuff. And I don't, the only similarity I see is that you're not using the ground for farming in either case. So just an opinion.
And one of the things I encourage a lot of county officials, especially working with Purdue, we are doing bus tours and workshops where we bring people into different regions. We've got one going on in White County here in March. We're looking at setting one up in Randolph County and then one in Fulton and Tipton County, where we will actually take people out to see the solar fields so they can see firsthand, what it's like, get inside the fence and look at them. Because sometimes that's the only way to really see what's going on.
So I have another question.
I should stop talking.
Why do you think that there is so much opposition to solar overall from counties that, are looking to have it, come to their county or not? And also, within counties that already have, solar implemented.
Okay, and I can use White County as an example. When they set up their first solar ordinance, like I said, they had a 50-foot setback. That is not enough from a property line. But they didn't change it in the process. They went ahead and approved. Now, again, they've got 5 projects, 5 solar and 7 wind. So they didn't shut them down until here just last month that they said, okay, we need to redo our ordinance. So that's one thing with White County and what's happened as process has changed. When we think about a lot of the opposition, first of all, they're basing their information on, I saw it on the internet. And I'm sorry, but not everything is factual on the internet. That's why I source absolutely everything. And I use the National Renewable Energy Lab a lot, been out there talking with them because I want factual information. I don't want, I heard it and then all of a sudden the opposition grows. One person hears it and another one overhears it, but it's not necessarily factual information. They say we're taking away all of our food. Well, 46%, 2 years ago, 46% of Indiana's corn goes into the ethanol industry. Last year, 43%. 26% of our soybeans go into the biodiesel. That's not food. That is an energy, transportation energy. So, there's a lot of misconceptions about what we actually produce here. And that's why we're trying to get the agrivoltaics going so we can show people that, okay, yes, we are using it for energy production now, but we could actually, and Purdue's doing this study for me, actually be producing more food on these solar acres than what they actually have been producing because it hasn't been producing food. So, because of again, going into ethanol and biodiesel. And so when we hear opposition, it's real easy to feed off of the opposition, I guess. And I agree, everyone has their opinions and I do not stop anyone from saying, I don't like it, and I never will. I understand that. But at least I want people to make informed decisions on the facts, not on misinformation.
Okay, this will be my last one. I would think, I know that a lot of people in this room don't just look at social media to make their decisions of their opinions. I know there's a lot of research and, publications and articles and whatnot, going on with several, if not all of the people here. You know,
Pam, I'm gonna hold you to a question,
okay,
okay? You will get another chance.
okay. I'm gonna have another opinion, so I'll be done. Thank you.
Thank you.
You'll get another
I do
chance.
appreciate
Yeah.
the questions. I really do. I appreciate all the questions. And what I say is good, bad, and ugly, because that's the way I learn, because then I go back and do some more research too.
Suzanne Peebles. How much of a subsidy does each solar company get per acre?
I don't have a per acre number. We did do research, and I actually, in one of my other presentations, I have the chart looking at federal subsidies between the coal and gas industry, renewable energy, and agriculture. Agriculture actually receives the largest number of subsidies, and then coal and gas, and right now renewable energy, and that goes back to 1969. Let's see, I know agriculture was like at 24 million per year. Coal and gas was at 22, and then your renewables was at like 15. Because renewables just started getting subsidies here, much later than coal and gas. So coal and gas has been receiving them for a long time. I don't have the number per acre though.
What would happen if the subsidies dry up or are taken away?
I think you saw the demand. We need energy, and we need energy produced here locally. Yes, the subsidies do help, just like if we get a tax break, am I not going to take that tax break? So that's what's happening with any business out there. If they get a tax break, they're going to take it. But we still have an energy problem that we have to solve. And so what will probably happen is we may see our utility rates go up, which if what's happening here today is that's being proposed out there, we'll see utility rates go up too, because it's because of that supply and demand that we're looking at.
Is it cheaper to recycle a panel or take it to the dump?
Right now, I would say it is less expensive to take it to the landfill. However, even the developers and the communities, communities are actually requiring they be recycled in their ordinance. But you've got to remember, there is not sufficient recycling available today, but it's growing. And Purdue has actually been studying, they've been shipping some of those panels actually overseas to third world countries. They're building houses out of them because they're building shelters, because that's what's available.
Can you describe a good neighbor agreement?
Yes, I can. We actually had a good neighbor agreement in White County. And so what happens is generally a good neighbor agreement says, okay, I've got wind or solar in my property here, but my neighbor next to it doesn't, but they're considered in the project area. And so the developer pays a stipend to that non-participating landowner because he's in the project area. It's almost like wind rights or sun rights. Okay, the sun shines across their property too. I'm using that sun. I'm going to give them a payment. They're generally minimal compared to the actual lease payments that the actual participating landowners receive. The thing that is coming up a lot of times, people will say, well, which is better? Because there are some communities that are saying we need a property value guarantee that any property within a certain mile of this project, that the developer agrees to buy or pay the difference if they try to sell it and it doesn't sell for what they expect. Now, the thing to remember, who's going to enforce it? And is it truly because of the solar field, or did they let the house go, or is the economy gone south? And so there's a lot of questions on that. But some communities are saying, well, we'd rather see everybody receive a good neighbor agreement instead of having a property value. So it's a give and take, a discussion. I don't have a definite opinion myself because I'm seeing both and just not sure.
That's one. How many total megawatts are planned in Indiana?
The chart showed,
We couldn't see real well.
oh, okay.
How small?
Right here. So as of right now, we have, if all of the projects come online, so we have one gig of power, of solar power being produced today. We have 2.1 gigs of solar under construction, and we have 6.3 gigs that have been permitted, but construction not started. If all of those come online, and I'm sorry if I wasn't talking loud enough, if all of those come online, which is doubtful, because they apply for permits, that doesn't mean every permit is going to build. But if all of those come online, we would have 9.5 gigs of solar. And if all the wind comes online with what's already operating, we would have 4.5 gigs of wind.
Thank you. Okay, another question, that's okay.
And you raised, it's kind of a question, Chris Hickman again, kind of a question, but a statement, a mixture, but you said about taking a bus trip around to see a solar field. Would it be possible to not just do a bus trip to see a solar field, but also to see the construction of the solar field? So you can witness then the sound of the pylons being driven in, the sound of the equipment operating, because that would be a long process from the beginning to start to finish of a project that people would have to endure. And then also, to be able to hear the sound of the inverters, because it's the fans and things for that, it can be quite noisy, so.
Yeah, the challenge with under construction, it's under construction. And so you have to, even when I go out there, I have to wear my hat and my vest and my, steel-toe boots. It's difficult to get inside because of liability and risk, inside a solar fence when it's under construction. You can drive by and see.
Well, that's kind of what I'm saying is because I hauled hundreds of loads of logs from that particular around Reynolds and Monticello and all that. I don't know how many semi loads I hauled. And I got to see firsthand the process and hear everything. And so it's an eye-opening experience that I think is a part of the process, not just seeing the finished product and say, doesn't this look nice? But
I'd like to ask to see, like I said, I know we can't get into the field once it's under construction, but that's a good point. I'll take that back to Purdue and see, can we do a drive-by of an under construction site?
the actual question that I had before that came up was, at what point are the bonds 100% in place for the decommissioning process?
Before they even receive their improvement location permit.
Well, I've read somewhere it was waived for 5 years, and then after the first 5 years, they would have to put up 25% of the bond, and after
Was that
15.
community's choice?
So, well, that's okay. So it's not a industry standard that's used. It's a per.
Community
So
negotiation.
part of the ordinances would be, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, guys.
At this time, if it's agreeable, I would like to cut off questions. There will be time for rebuttal. I'd like to ask, and the reason is the weather is coming.
Yeah.
In fact, it's already here. And I know some of them have yeah. And so we're trying to be respectful and get everyone home safely. So what I'd like to do, planning commission, after you've heard questions, do you have any other further comments or questions?
With the current solar panels that are available now, what's the life expectancy of a field that would be put in, say, today, or even because it's what, a 6-7 year process to have them put in? So the technology at that point, how long do you think that field would stay with the panels that are there?
Well, first of all, they're not even going to order their panels until they're about ready to put them in. And so they want the most recent technology too. But those panels are generally 20-25 years lifespan. Now, again, it depends on the weather. It depends on, a lot of other things. But the panels themselves don't receive the wear and tear. It's the racking system that is moving it.
Anything else from the planning commission? So at this time, then I'd like to open it up for rebuttal. And I'm going to be a little bossier than what I really planned. But I do want everyone to get home safely, and you can check your phones to see it's here. This, as I said at the beginning of our meeting, we are not going to make any decisions tonight. It will still be months, and there will be another public meeting that you'll be able to voice further comments. So at this time, if you would like to make a rebuttal, and I know Mr. Hagel was talking to you, you may have had comments. I am going to keep it as please to a 2-minute minimum, or maximum. But I would like to honor anyone's questions because I know we all have ideas. And then I would like to then give Connie just a closing comment before we all head out the door. So is anyone else that would like to make a comment this evening?
Can we still do a question with our comment? Just because
I will give you 2 minutes either way. You can play what you want to, okay? And I'm not, again, it's getting dangerous out there.
you're okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Kind of helps you understand what we're looking at.
No, and I appreciate that.
Okay, so I see like 50 solar, projects are on Madison, Mullinex. I'm actually not part of the city, I'm part of the county. But I think this really does affect everyone that comes involved. I say when I drive down the road and I see hundreds of acres of my farmland, as someone who wants to get into agriculture, being from an agriculture community, we're less than 1% of the population here that gets to farm, and I take it to heart. So it is very serious. I'm not saying you don't count ag, because you definitely do when you fought it through. You're very intelligent. I respect that. So I see 50 acres, or 50 solar facilities. How many acres is each facility?
It varies depending on the site and the megawatts. I don't, I really have to go back to IURC and pull that data up.
Is like the 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 acres for one solar farm fairly accurate?
If it's a 200 megawatt solar, if it's only a 100, then it's going to be less than 1,000. Yeah.
Which, I mean, you would want more bang for your buck. My
Well, it
thought,
depends on the grid permit.
yes, my thought is like your average family farm in the States is 430 acres. So if I'm donating, or whatever the word is, committing 1,200 to 1,500 acres of farmland, that's 3 to 5 small family farms we're consuming. And so the average age of a farmer is roughly 58 right now. So he gets to put out for 30 years, but he dies when he's 80. So how do we pass on that accession? Is that stopping young farmers like myself from getting access to the ability to farm? Now, granted, it might be different. We could have solar panels, we could graze sheep. I actually have baby doll South Downs. They're perfect for this. They're amazing for that. But at the same time, I still am diversifying myself. You want to row crop, you want to have livestock. I can see having some set aside in those scenarios, but it locks up that ability for the next generation to come on board. And as an ag family, county, I still think that's very important to us too, is providing for the next generation, rather that's energy or.
You feel like you need to answer? No, and thank you, Madison, for honoring.
Yeah, I just,
I said it.
or no, I can't get it out now. Okay. I just want to expand on something. Most of these farmers or landowners that are signing these agreements, it's because their heirs are not wanting to come back to the farm. And that's where we're seeing that happen a lot.
My only thought on that is they can still own it and lease it. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can still own your land, never have to sell, but you can lease to a new farmer coming up. Versus, I mean, I know it's not the same money. I totally get that. But for me, it's worth giving that somebody an opportunity over an extra paycheck for solar, I guess.
I just had a few things to, I guess, tell the planning commission. Before a solar panel or industrial park is what we call them, and solar would be put up, I would encourage you to have the neighbors' homes values guaranteed. Another thing is, a lot of times the solar company's not responsible for any complaints or damage or problems. It'll be the landowner's insurance that'll pay. Even in Spencer County, there was a lien put on all the farmers' ground because the solar company took off and didn't, they go bankrupt and so forth, $9 million on all the farmers' ground. The solar company has access to all that land that's being leased 24/7. And we need to look for the conflict of interest. We attended a meeting with a attorney and a real estate broker. And they said these 4 things that I just mentioned to you, so look for the conflict of interest. And we have to be leery of that. And what are we after? Is it just money? Because the only thing really green here is the money in all of this. And I'm not talking about personal solar. I am not against personal solar. Or even to help like the water treatment plant or a factory. If it stays here, I'm not against it. Then I had a question for Mr. Lehman. When will we be able to talk to the planning commission before the new members, before you start your work on the ordinance? I know Mr. Long mentioned, we've had plenty of time, we can't decide time and time again, but we put it on pause so that we could come back in January, and you said we would start with the new members, and we really haven't had a chance. This is really the first time we've had a chance to speak to them. I know Mr. Stakeman, it's his first time. Mr. Griner isn't here, so that was my concern.
Well, I anticipate that there are gonna be several meetings yet. We're probably not going to be in a position to present anything for final consideration until probably sometime in the summer. So there'll be probably at least 3 or 4 other opportunities.
I was.
And before we can make any recommendation to the city council, there'll have to be a public hearing where everybody will have an opportunity to speak.
Right. I'm gonna use the mic because I know they said to use the mic. I was just under the impression that this was it and that the work sessions would not be comment, which I understand that. And then we would have a chance at public meeting. And I was just afraid that if we only get a chance at public meeting, the ordinance is pretty much finished and the new people especially will not hear all the research and studies that we've done and visits that we've taken.
The current plan is that next month's meeting will be a work session where we won't take any comment from anybody. But then I anticipate looking at the ordinance in at least 3 different sections on a more detailed basis. And at that point, yes, I think we should take comment so that if something is raised that we think ought to be in there, you have the opportunity to raise it, we have the opportunity to hear it, and we have the opportunity to get it in there before we have a final document to consider at the public hearing.
But Doug, at that meeting that we have our work session, people can still come and sit
There'll
down.
still, yes, it'll still be a public meeting, it's just that we won't take any public comment.
Thank you for that clarification. Would anyone else like to comment?
I just have one quick comment.
Nope, that's fine.
I just wanna
Come on up, take
I
notes.
just want to thank you all, for taking the time and doing the due diligence and, looking at both sides and we appreciate that. And thank you.
Thank you for that. If there are no further comments, audience may leave. I have ignored point A under old business, so for you, I have to clean up some things. So members of the commission, if you would please review the minutes from the January. Don is gonna just maybe.
Don is watching.
But if you could please, take a look at those minutes, make sure they're answered, and if they are, please, make a motion to accept. If there's something you need to do correctly, please bring that on. They have a motion to accept.
Justin made the motion.
Justin, thank you. All those in favor? All those opposed? Thank you. And now we have a motion to adjourn the meeting. And a second. All those in favor?
I saw that later.
This meeting is adjourned. John, ready for you to come back?